Dr. John and Julie Gottman out of the Love Lab are able to do something quite amazing. They have been studying married couples for the last 30 years, and they found something quite unique, which is that they can predict with 93.6% accuracy whether a couple will divorce or not. And when they look through all the different variables and the evidence, they found one thing was underpinning this high accuracy rate. It was how the couples had performed under pressure. How did they behave? How did they react? How did they respond to those high pressure moments? Each of us wants to be able to perform under pressure, and there are many tools that we employ to perform in such moments, such as judgment, decision making, memory, and focus. Pressure downgrades all of those tools. And in other words, pressure is the enemy to your success. More often than not, pressure causes you to fail or perform under your capabilities. And the science is very clear about it. They've studied athletes across various different sports, and rarely, and I mean rarely, do athletes perform above their baseline in high pressure situations. So in this video, I'm going to teach you 5 tools on how to deal with pressure. I'm going to teach you how to depressurize a situation. I'm going to teach you how to increase your capacity to handle pressure. And I'm going to teach you how to avoid those self-sabotaging moments and immunize yourself against this so that you can perform in the moments that matter the most. Now, the first step in gaining an edge and being able to perform under pressure is to understand a major fundamental difference. And that is the difference between pressure and stress. Pressure moments are stressful moments where your success matters. Success and performance is what's important, and success and performance and survival to some degree is on the line. Stressful moments, in a stressful moment, reduction is the goal. In a pressure moment, success is the goal. And when you look at the two, while there may be some of the same physiological signs and symptoms between pressure and stressful moments, a closer look reveals that stressful moments don't matter as much to your success or survival or performance. And so with that being said, the first goal in gaining an edge and being able to perform under pressure is to understand those two fundamental differences between pressure and stress. The second step in learning how to perform under pressure is to understand how pressure affects you. So as a whole, pressure impacts you very negatively. It increases physiological and neurological responses to situations, and that often causes adverse effects on your performance, such as you become more impulsive, you become mentally rigid, and you actually have less ability to access particular regions of your brain, specifically your prefrontal cortex, when you are under a high pressure and stressful situation. Pressure moments as a whole tend to have 3 common variables, and so they are 1, importance, number 2, responsibility, and number 3, uncertainty. So the first one, importance, is this moment is very important to you. Maybe it's this trade, maybe it's this hand, maybe it's this, sporting event, whatever it is, this moment is important to you. When you experience importance of it, it increases the pressure. Number 2 is responsibility, and this has to do with the fact that your performance is based upon you and you are responsible for that. So anytime we feel responsible for a particular situation, the pressure tends to increase. The third one, and this is kind of the big kahuna, is uncertainty. So when you are in a situation, you know that there is a very limited range of outcomes, you tend to experience less pressure. However, if you are in a situation where the potential range of outcomes is much more uncertain, the pressure actually increases. And there's a great study on this. So Hennesey and Levine had actually done this study on uncertainty. What they did is they took these animals and they gave them these super mild electrical shocks, things that wouldn't really hurt them. But what they were trying to do was measure the neurological reactions. And particularly, they were looking for this kind of cortisol that was being produced. Now, for those of you that don't know, cortisol is a steroid and a hormone that's produced in your adrenal glands, and it's something that is in your brain. And so when you have spiked or increased levels of cortisol in your brain, you tend to actually have much more stressful experiences. You have a kind of a spike in arousal. You tend to be much more impulsive and mentally rigid. And one thing that's common behind our fight or flight response is high levels of cortisol. Now, why is this important? First off, cortisol does all kinds of things to your body and brain. Too much cortisol can reduce your stomach mucosal lining, which increases the percentage chance you're going to have ulcers. And one other thing, or a couple other things it does, is that too much cortisol in the brain will actually shrink your hippocampus. Now, why is that important? Because your hippocampus is what records the factual pieces of data and stores that in your memory. And so by shrinking that, you're decreasing your ability to actually store the correct information and recognize patterns and recognize things correctly. On top of it, while it shrinks the hippocampus, it actually increases the gray matter in the amygdala. And the amygdala is the primary part of your brain that both regulates and activates the fight or flight response. Now, when you're in a fight or flight response, your performance is going to go down and you're going to have less access to your brain, particularly prefrontal cortex. It's very much like losing 20 points of IQ. So good luck performing under that. So hopefully you can start to see how cortisol affects your performance. Getting back to the study of Hennesey and Levine, what they would do is they would actually take these animals, give them these very mild shocks on their paws, and then measure the neurological response and the cortisol that was produced. What they found was almost fascinating. It was quite interesting. So when they give the animals very regular, mild shocks to their paws, the spikes and responses were very, very small. However, when they varied the times that they would give the shocks and made them random, the spikes were incredibly high and abnormal. And what this is pointing to, and this is something that we experience as well, is that uncertainty, when we experience uncertainty, it will increase tremendously the amount of pressure and stress that you experience in a situation. So it's super critical for you to understand how pressure affects you and then negotiate your reactions to it and transform your reactions to it so that you can perform under pressure in the moments that matter. The third step in performing under pressure is to avoid pressure inducers. And I want to talk about a great experiment about this. So at the Princeton Theological Seminary, what they did is they took this large body of students and they kind of put them under this experiment without them knowing it. They took two groups of people. In the first group, they had to give a lecture to other members on the class or in their school about seminary vocation, the different jobs that they could have as they continued in this field. The second group of people, they had to give a lecture in class on the Good Samaritan sermon. And just to briefly summarize that, it's basically saying, hey, if there are people who are in need, you need to help them. You should offer your assistance. Now, what they did then is they took those two groups and they split them into two separate groups as well. The people in the vocation and the people in the Good Samaritan sermon, they both had the same requirement. However, Group A in each one of those groups was told, hey, you have to give this particular class. It's at such and such room at this time. You have a couple hours, so no rush. Group B in each one of those groups, they were told, hey, you have to teach this class. Oh, shoot. You need to teach this in 5 minutes. And it's going to take you about 10 minutes to get across campus to do that. So you need to pack up your books now. And you need to go right now. Make sure you're there and don't be late. Now, what they did within this experiment is quite fascinating. At the door of the room that they had to get into, they had this kind of agent there. And this person looked like they had been in a very bad physical encounter. They were beaten up, their clothes were all messed up, they were bloody. They needed assistance. Regardless of whether they were teaching on the Good Samaritan sermon or the vocation, the results were stunning. Those who were not under time pressure were, of that group, 90% of those people had actually stopped and taken time to help that individual. The groups that were under the time pressure, 63% of them completely ignored the man. In fact, they recorded some of it, and some people actually stepped over this person to get into their class. So they were 6 times more likely to ignore somebody and help somebody in need if they were under this pressure of time, which is a fascinating experiment. So your goal as a person, as someone who is a performer, to reduce these performance inducers, one of them is to relate to time and understand how time increases pressure. As a whole, time not only increases pressure, but it reduces creativity. We tend to have less mental bandwidth towards solving the problem and digging deep into something if we know that there is a certain amount of time before we have to complete it. What happens is actually then our efforts go towards completion instead of coming up with the best solution. So the first pressure inducer to reduce is time. The second one is called the reinvestment strategy. If what you're doing is working well, we tend to have this idea that if we increase the amount of effort, that will actually accelerate our process. But in actuality, the studies show that when you double or triple or increase the amounts of what you're doing, it doesn't actually increase your performance or process. On top of it, if what you're doing is incorrect, by doubling your efforts, you're not making the situation any better, you're making it worse. So the first one is the second one is the reinvestment strategy. The third one is asking the big why. Why am I feeling so much pressure on this? What is so important about this particular trade, this particular hand, this particular interview, this particular game, whatever it is that we're doing? What is so important about this? Is this one game, this one hand, this one moment in time, this one interview, this one trade, is it going to determine the entire trajectory of our careers? 99% of the time, the answer is no. So when you step back and start to ask the why am I feeling pressure in this moment? What is the importance behind this? Then what that tends to do is it tends to depressurize the situation, because realize this isn't as important as we think it is. By increasing the importance, we tend to increase the pressure on ourselves. So by reducing the importance of it and asking the question why, we tend to reduce these pressure inducers. Along the lines of asking the why, I want to give a brief shout out to Mike Bellafiore at SMB Trading. So I've talked to him a couple times, great guy. He has a great book called The Playbook, which I definitely recommend reading. And so I was watching a video of his not too long ago where he kind of talks about this, asking the why and really depressurizing the situation through understanding the importance of it. And he said something really unique. He said, well, something, fantastic around this, which is that he said, look, as traders, we're not curing cancer here. We're not solving the world's issues. We're just executing an individual trade. And whether he was aware of it consciously or unconsciously, he's talking about this same thing. He's talking about depressurizing a situation by understanding the level of importance, by asking the why behind it. When you tend to make things as a chance of the lifetime, or this is it, this is everything, this is where it all matters, then what tends to happen is we kind of amplify and kind of exacerbate the level of importance and pressure in the situation, and that causes our performance to go down. So definitely try and ask the question of why, and really look at things with a very kind of objective, realistic perspective. Is this something that is a chance of a lifetime, or is it just one moment in many opportunities that I'm going to have in my lifetime? Most likely, it's the latter scenario. The fourth method and tool to performing under pressure is to engage in pressure-reducing strategies, and I'm going to give you one here. And that has to do with acting fast or slow. So there's been this great study that was done on both golfers and archers, and they kind of went through two different groups. They looked at novices and they looked at experts. And what they realized was fascinating. When they told the novices to focus on the mechanics, to just, all you're doing is focusing on the mechanics of what they're doing, they noticed that they tended to perform better. However, with the experts, when they told them to focus on the mechanics of what they're doing, their performance actually decreased. Why is that? For beginning people, and people who are, still kind of learning your skills and they're not subconscious yet, what happens is that if you're focusing on the mechanics, then you're filling your working memory and your conscious mind with the information and things you need to do to execute. And that's what you're working with. That's what you need to be doing with your mind and your brain. However, experts, they already know subconsciously what they need to be doing. So their conscious mind actually needs to be focused on other things. And so this is what you can do as a pressure reducing strategy. First off, evaluate your skill level. Hey, am I a beginner? Am I intermediate? Am I advanced? If you're a beginner, then your conscious mind while you are doing something, it doesn't matter what it is, a skill or task, should just be solely on being focused, present in the moment, and really just thinking about your mechanics. Hey, I need to do this posture and pull like this and adjust like this, and my grip is like this, or I'm pulling that. That's what you should just be focusing on, is the mechanics. If you are intermediate, then what you need to do is to look at all the things that you can do with 90+% accuracy and consistency. Hey, as a trader, maybe I can risk the same amount every single trade, or maybe I can pull the trigger when my strategy comes up. Or if you're a poker player, you know which hands you're going to be folding and which ones you want to be playing. If you can do that with 90+% accuracy and consistency, then that is an automatic task and you don't need to be focusing on the mechanics of it. The things that you are still working on, that's where you should specifically be focusing on the mechanics. The rest, just let your subconscious mind take over. And if you're an expert, we know the answer. What you should be doing is not focusing on the mechanics so much, more focusing on strategy at this point. And one thing you can do is create kind of a mental program to make sure that when it comes time to execute, whether it's a golf swing, whether it's an archer and you're pulling the bow, whether you're a poker player or a trader, it doesn't matter. You should just be letting your subconscious mind take over and let your conscious mind focus on other things. Focus on, if you want to run a mental program to execute something, it should be something that allows you to execute that program with speed so that the working memory doesn't get taken up and that your mind can be focused on the right things. So acting fast or slow as a pressure reduction strategy. Number 5. Becoming aware of how we interpret a high pressure situation. So as a whole, the pressure or the experience of the situation is not what necessarily determines our response to it or our reaction to it. It actually comes down to how do we interpret the situation we are experiencing. And this is super important. It really comes down to something called cognitive appraisal. So cognitive appraisal is how we tend to appraise a situation. Particularly, are we looking at it? Do we have the skills to this? How important it is? And so forth. Now, this is crucial because if we feel that we don't have the skills and we increase the importance of the situation, well, then we're going to give it a very unfavorable cognitive appraisal in that situation. We'll look at it as more of a crisis, and that will increase our negativity bias. However, if we feel or consciously know that we have the skills and it's not too important, or it's not something that's life or death, then we tend to look at it more as a challenge. And that's important because looking as a challenge versus a crisis is going to skew how you relate to it. On top of it, this whole challenge versus crisis is also very critical. When we look at a situation as a crisis, we tend to be more hopeless, we tend to be more negative, fearful, worried, anxiety. All these things are going to reduce our performance and increase the pressure that we're experiencing. However, if we look at a situation as a challenge, it actually increases our positivity bias. And then what happens is the brain actually starts looking at, hey, how have I solved problems like this in the past? And starts looking for solutions. But when you focus on the problem, you actually magnify it. We do need to recognize the problem and we need to appraise it correctly. But then at that point, we don't need to kind of keep focusing on the problem, That just magnifies the problem. And what it does is it actually causes us to be problem focused instead of solution focused. So it's super important that we learn to have this proper cognitive appraisal so that we're interpreting the situation correctly as not necessarily a crisis, but more of a challenge. So interpreting the pressure situation correctly and becoming aware of that. That is probably the most important thing that you could be doing in terms of performing under pressure, is interpreting the situation correctly. Now, to review the 5 tools to performing under pressure, the first one, just to remind you, is to understand the difference between pressure and stress. Number 2 is to understand how pressure affects you, both physiologically and neurologically. The third is to avoid pressure increasing activities. The fourth one is to then engage in pressure reduction strategies. And the last one has to do with our cognitive appraisal and how we interpret the situation so that we're relating to the situation correctly. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give us a thumbs up below and share your comments on what you got on it. Also, if there are any topics or lessons that you would like future videos to be on, make sure to let us know in the comment section below and share this video with anybody else that you think can benefit from it. You do these 5 steps and you're going to find that you are performing not only at your capacity, but you're performing in the moments that matter the most. And you're guaranteeing or giving yourself the greatest chance possible to succeed. You start to do that and you increase your ability to handle pressure, and you're going to find a confidence that will be with you anytime in the moments that you really need it. So with that being said, I look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to hearing about your growth and development, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.